Trails Through Daybreak 2, the sequel to my favourite game of all time, and yet another entry in my favourite series. The previous game was my personal game of the year for 2024, so I was super excited to get into its sequel. I did already know going into it that the fanbase is very mixed on this entry, and it is the most divisive entry yet, but as a true Trails fan should, I wanted to experience the game for myself and see how it holds up. But before we do get to the review, make sure you subscribe, as only 4% of you are currently subscribed, and my goal is to reach at least 200 subs in the next few months. Any support is much appreciated. I appreciate everyone recently on TikTok too. I've been getting a lot of likes and that. Thank you so much for all of that. But for now, without further delay, let's get into the review. I have two topics I want to speak about first, and that's the translation and localization. Let's first start off with the positive. The fact that we got localization this quickly. Usually we would need to wait a couple of years, but the localization was announced on the release date of the previous game, which is brilliant, and hopefully this means we'll be seeing this happen more often in the future. And who knows, maybe it will lead to the next few Falcon games being released worldwide instead of just Japan first, and then worldwide years later. For example, the Daybreak games actually came out many years ago. I believe it was 2021 for Daybreak 1 and 2022 for Daybreak 2. Which is honestly a massive surprise that we are getting both of these within a couple of months. Hopefully this is a sign that things are on a better track and localizations and translations will be much quicker, and we'll be getting these games way earlier than we usually would be. Moving on to the translation, I will try to keep this short, but it does seem like there's quite a few people that hate this translation to the point where they're harassing the main translator and giving them death threats. Firstly, the Trails series has always been political, and it's a big part of the series world building. The point is, Zemuria functions as any other world would. It has conflicts, societal issues, and discrimination, and this isn't a new thing either. It's been like this since the first entry 20 years ago, and it seems to me that people are just hating on the translation because they are full of hatred and they aren't true fans of the series. And if you are disgusted by the way they handle Catcher's identity and believe it to be woke, then you clearly did not pay attention to the hints in the previous game, or what it means in our real history too. I thought the handling of his identity was brilliant and didn't feel forced or pushed whatsoever. Now moving on to the real issue with the translation, I can understand why people are annoyed at them for using certain slang words during dialogue, as it doesn't really have a place in this world, though luckily I can only think of like 3 occasions where characters use slang words that are out of place. Now let's get into our main topic, starting with the story. Honestly, the game starts off brilliantly. I really enjoyed the prologue, and the twist towards the end kept me invested and really wanting more, especially with the prologue starting with you sort of clearing your name as a crimson beast similar to Van's form is causing chaos around Edith, and with the introduction of a new path system that branches off into many dead ends, it was really intriguing. I will not be spoiling what I mean by dead ends, but let's just say it involves time and multiple branching paths that do eventually come together. And it was really looking like a great sequel, and as I started Act 1, that feeling was further reinforced with the game getting right into it. I was really happy with how things started, especially with each act having 2 sections, one with Van and various party members in his journey outside of Edith, and the other being you playing as 2 part-time helpers and returning characters Nadia and Swin. And the same thing could be said for Act 2. I was really enjoyed, I was invested, but that changed right at the end of the intermission and going into Act 3, where I really started to understand why people dislike the story, and we'll get into that part now. The ending of the intermission chapter makes the whole first half of the game feel pointless and made that sequel feeling go away. And instead, the game switched, making it feel less like a sequel and more like a side story or a filler arc. Act 3 was all over the place, and whilst it definitely wasn't bad, it just didn't feel like it had that deep storytelling the series is known for, and to be honest, it ruined the game's narrative. The timeline of Act 3 is all over the place, messy, rushed, and overall didn't make any sense at all. And if all of that wasn't enough to drag the game down, well, the villains also didn't feel compelling, and what could have been a great villain in Act 3 was instead used as a stupid plot twist which just made the villain feel poorly written. Then came the final chapter. Honestly, really enjoyed the final chapter. Not to the extent of the previous game's final chapter, but the reveal of the Crimson Beast's true identity was very predictable from the start, but I still enjoyed it overall. But after fighting the final boss and getting through the cutscenes, there's not really much telling us what the direction of the series is going to be in the end. The game just ends and nothing really happens, there's no end credit scene, nothing. So I'm just intrigued to see where the plot goes after this. I do know the next game in the series is rated the best game in the Trail series, so I really do want to see how the narrative is going to go in that game and to see if they're going to fix any of the issues from this game's story. Let's move on to the gameplay and other aspects. The blend between action and turn-based combat returns from the previous game, with various improvements, and let me tell you, is the combat so goddamn fun in this game, and with the new additions, it really adds to the diversity of the combat. You now have the ability to use arch during action combat, and there's also a new perfect dodge mechanic, which makes stunning enemies easier. There's also changes to the turn-based system, including how S-crafts work, turn order, and UI improvements. I also really enjoy the fact that some bosses can now also use S-breaks during combat to catch you off guard and interrupt your turn. The animations have also been refined, and overall the combat system has been greatly improved, and I'm excited to see how the battle system evolves in future titles. However, that's not to say things are perfect, so let's get into it. Firstly, though, we now have 2 new characters in our roster, and some from the previous game that are now part of the permanent lineup, there's still many missing characters that aren't playable, which is stupid in my opinion, as there's many characters throughout your journey in the game that join your party, but you cannot control them, they act on their own, and you can't even play as them. Which to me is an absolute joke, as these characters were playable in the previous game, and that's a bit of a letdown for me. How one of the core characters from the previous game isn't even in this game, which is silly in my opinion, as they could have been used in a different way, which I'll speak about later, that doesn't involve them being in the story. Now, one of my main complaints about Daybreak 1 was that the combat was far too easy. But is that the case here? Well, yes and no. Overall the combat is more easy than the previous game, but there are also a few tough fights, especially if you're on hard or nightmare difficulty like me. There's also a few optional fights that pose a threat, and with the return of battle conditions to the game, there could be a little bit of challenge depending on how you play and if you've built the right characters, but again it all depends on certain mechanics which I will speak about later. There's also only a few bosses in the game that are unique, and most of the fights just feel too similar. You'll often be fighting the same bosses throughout the game. However, the final boss was amazing. I absolutely loved the way they used the combat mechanics, and they made it feel unique, and they used the mechanics to their full potential. Now moving on to the other game mode, which is the Märchen Garten, which almost acts like the Reverie Corridor, but in my opinion is a complete downgrade, so I'll get into why. Let's do that now. The Märchen Garten is pretty much a copy of the Reverie Corridor, but instead is laid out like a dungeon from the .hack games. And at first I did like this game mode, as exploring each floor for the first time was fun, but you'll need to keep repeating the same floors multiple times to get everything you need, which also gets very boring and dry fast. Each floor has different paths with different rewards on each of these paths, and a boss at the end. It's a lot to take in. You get fragments from clearing these floors, defeating enemies, destroying objects and stuff like that. That could be using a gacha-like mechanic to get useful items such as equipment, outfits, music packs, skill shards, healing items, whatever it is. And I did like this mechanic as a gacha player. It's fun to see a gacha mechanic with no real money involved. But again, the execution isn't great and it is quite boring. There is a lot to do outside of this, which I'll speak about later, but this whole game mode just feels a bit rushed. It is a lot better once you clear the game. There's a lot more to do here. There's a hub area, things like that. You've got little mini activities to do. You've got like a hacking mini game, which I'll speak about later because that's not just here. But the thing is, this game mode is boring. I don't like it whatsoever, and we're going to move on from this topic because it's going to get boring fast and there's not really much to speak about. Real quick though, I would like to say about what I was talking about earlier, where there's that one character that's completely missing from this game. He doesn't exist in this game for some reason. He's just not there. He doesn't make a single appearance. He doesn't even speak. They could have used him in this game mode, but no, they just said, no, we're not even going to have him in the game whatsoever. They could have also used the characters that you didn't get to play as, but you could still see in battle. They could have used them in this game mode as like an optional thing or thing that you unlock after finishing the game. You do unlock 2 characters from the previous game to play as in this game at the end of the game. But again, is that really right? Because there's a lot of characters that are just missing from the roster. And that's my main issue with the Märchen Garten, is it's just wasted potential. Now moving on to the side activities, starting off with the fact that the side activities actually exist in this game, unlike the previous entry which only had side quests and no minigames. Here we have the return of my favourite minigame, fishing, which is greatly improved, hacking, which I found super fun but pretty easy, one-on-one basketball, which is fun but too simple, cards games, which make a return, but honestly didn't like this iteration of the mechanic. And there are also many other side activities to do that really do further enhance the gameplay's value. I enjoyed a majority of these activities, and I'm excited to see how they take these mechanics in the future for the future installments in this franchise. I hope to see more in terms of endgame content, more side activities to do that add more value to the game that's not just the story or combat. Connection events are also better in this game, with some even having 2 people featured in them, which makes progression easier as there's less of them, so you don't feel overwhelmed. Side quests are great in this game, I actually enjoyed a majority of them, especially with this new mechanic which is tailing. It's exactly what you think it is, and it fits the game's tone perfectly. I would like to speak more in depth about all of these different mechanics, but let's move on to the final topic, the music and art style. First, let's speak about the animations in this game, and holy shit if they improved. Everything looks way better and more refined than before, and the cutscenes look insanely good. I'll play a bit of my favourite scene on the screen right now. This is from a moment, I think, in Act 1, I can't really remember. Honestly, it's a shame that there's only a few cutscenes in the game, because these are so high quality and so good looking, and they would further enhance the experience, but unfortunately there's a lack of them in this game. I also noticed there's a lack of using the Grendel in this game, which is a shame as well, but that's a separate issue. The soundtrack is brilliant, but I often thought that they used the wrong tracks at the wrong times, unlike in the previous game, which matched the OST perfectly to what was happening on screen. Things didn't really seem right there. I also noticed with the environments, you're exploring a lot of the same locations you explored in the previous game, with only, I think, 1 or 2 locations being completely brand new. It was a shame, an absolute shame, that they just wasted the potential of this game by making us explore the same locations over and over again. I think if they changed the setting a bit more, the story would have been enhanced a tiny bit more with these new locations, but we do explore a lot of the same locations. That said, these are some really highly detailed environments, especially the school area. It was cool to go to a place that wasn't a military academy like the previous games, or things like that. There was also this market town, which was cool to see. There's a lot of cool areas, but again, a lot of it is the same places that we were at in the first game, and you do spend a majority of your time in Edith, which was a big part of the first game, was that you explored outside of Edith, and during the daytime you would explore the city of Edith, but during the second half of each chapter you would go outside of Edith and explore the country. But that's not the case here, which is a crying shame. Anyway, let's move on to the final verdict. Overall, I enjoyed my time with Trails Through Daybreak 2, and the gameplay was the best I've seen since Reverie. But the story does drag the game down, and Märchen Garten does feel like wasted potential. However, individual character moments did shine here, especially with Ren as well as with Swin and Nadia. It does kind of feel like this is their own game, those 3 characters, and I do think they should have focused on the main characters as well as those 3 characters, but it is cool to see kind of a conclusion to their arcs, and I really want to see what they're going to do with these characters afterwards. I'm not sure what they're going to do, but I'm excited for the future. There's a lot I would like to speak about, and there's a lot I like about this game, but it's let down by all of the negatives. So I will be giving Trails Through Daybreak a 7 out of 10, and it really is a shame. This is my favourite game series of all time, and knowing that this game could have been better does disappoint me. What I do know is that the next game in the series will change everything. It will be the best game in the franchise according to other players, and will probably make me love the series even more. So I'm excited for the future. Hopefully that game can shed a bit of light on this game and change a few of my opinions and thoughts on things. Hopefully they can fill in some plot holes and change my thoughts on this game entirely. So thank you for watching. If you have any criticism, let me know in the comments. I'll be sure to look at feedback. If you have any reviews you would like me to do on games, anything really, let me know. If there's any support you can give me in terms of feedback, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.